Inside the ranch house, Ethan Cole stood by the window, a half-empty glass of bourbon in his hand. The amber light reflected against the glass, dancing over the framed photographs that lined the mantel, each one a frozen moment from a life that no longer existed. He stared at the largest photo, Clara Cole, his late wife. Her laughter seemed to echo faintly in the walls, though he hadn't heard it in a year since the promise, a year since her funeral. "I'll never love again," he'd said that night beside her hospital bed. "Not in this lifetime." Clara had smiled through her tears, her hand barely strong enough to reach his cheek. "Don't promise me that," she'd whispered. "Promise me you'll keep living." But he hadn't. Not really. He'd worked the ranch like a man possessed, sun up to sundown, feeding cattle, fixing fences, patching roofs, doing anything that would keep his mind from drifting back to her. The house had grown quiet, empty. The laughter was gone. The air itself felt colder somehow, even in the middle of Texas summer. And though people said time heals all wounds, Ethan had come to believe time only teaches you how to hide them better. That night, thunder rolled low across the land, shaking the windows. Ethan stepped out to the porch, coat pulled tight, hat low over his brow. He watched lightning flicker in the distance, painting the sky in quick white flashes. The ranch stretched before him, endless fences, dark barns, and the old windmill creaking like an old man's bones. He took a slow sip of bourbon and muttered to the wind, "Still keeping your promise, Clara. Just me and the silence." He turned to go inside, then stopped. Through the pounding rain, a faint glow appeared on the far road. Headlights. Nobody drove this far out after sundown, especially not during a storm. The nearest neighbor was 6 miles away. Ethan narrowed his eyes as the lights came closer, cutting through sheets of rain. A small truck crawled up the dirt road toward his gate, tires struggling in the mud. The truck stopped halfway up the drive, engine sputtering. A door opened. A woman stepped out, coat soaked through, her boots sinking into the wet ground. She raised an arm, waving through the storm. Ethan's heart froze. That face. Those eyes. For a moment, he thought the rain was playing tricks on him. She came closer, her voice breaking through the thunder. "Ethan! It's me! Grace!" He blinked hard, as if the name itself was lightning. Grace Miller, Clara's younger sister. The one who'd vanished right after the funeral and never said goodbye. She reached the porch, rain dripping from her hair. Her coat clung to her frame, and her breath came in heavy bursts. For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, silent, unreadable. The resemblance to Clara was painful. Same eyes, same shape of lips, but there was something different in her. Something harder, worn down by life. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she replied, shivering. He hesitated, torn between anger and memory. Then, wordlessly, he stepped aside. "Get in." Grace walked in slowly, her boots squelching against the wooden floor. Inside, the air was warm. The faint smell of pine logs burning in the fireplace filled the room. She looked around and smiled faintly. "You kept it just like she left it," she whispered. "Didn't see a reason to change what ain't broken," Ethan said. His tone was rough, but there was something fragile behind it. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The sound of the storm filled the silence between them, wind, rain, and the distant groan of thunder. Ethan poured her coffee, the only act of kindness he knew how to offer. "Why now, Grace?" he asked. "After all this time?" She stared at the steam rising from her cup before answering. Because I couldn't come sooner. Not until I found this. She reached into her soaked coat pocket and pulled out a small brown envelope, worn, creased, and sealed with tape. It's a letter from Clara. She gave it to me before she died, said if anything ever happened to her, I should come here. Ethan frowned. She never told me about that. She didn't tell you everything, Grace said quietly. The words hit like a slap. Ethan's jaw tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means Clara had reasons, Ethan. Things she didn't want to burden you with. I was her husband, he snapped. Her life was my burden. Grace flinched, but didn't look away. And you think she didn't know that? For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Ethan stared into the flames, fists clenched, heart pounding with questions he didn't want to ask. Finally, he muttered, "So you came all this way just to hand me a letter?" Grace's voice softened. I came because I needed to, and because I'm not sure I can face what's inside it alone. The wind suddenly howled through the chimney, blowing the fire sideways. The back door banged open with a loud crash. Ethan stood quickly, grabbing it before the wind could tear it off the hinges. When he turned back, Grace was standing in front of Clara's portrait by the fireplace. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the frame like she was touching her sister's face. She was so beautiful, Grace whispered. She still is, Ethan replied quietly. Grace turned, eyes glistening. You still talk to her? He nodded once. Every night before I sleep, sometimes in the mornings too. A sad smile touched her lips. Then maybe she sent me here. Ethan stared at her. Don't say things like that. Why not? She said, voice trembling. Maybe she knew you needed someone to remind you that life's still moving. I don't need reminders, he said coldly. I just need peace. Grace looked at him for a long moment, the flicker of fire reflecting in her eyes. Peace and loneliness aren't the same thing, Ethan. That silenced him. After a few seconds, she sighed. I lost my job in Dallas. My lease was up. I didn't know where else to go. Clara's letter said you'd help me if I ever needed it. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. So this is charity? No, she said quickly. It's survival. He looked at her, rain-soaked, exhausted, but still standing proud. Clara's blood through and through. Finally, he sighed. You can stay in the guest cabin for a few days. I'll have Tom fix the heater tomorrow. Her lips curved in relief. Thank you, Ethan. Don't thank me, he said, turning away. It's just what Clara would have wanted. He grabbed his hat and walked to the door. Lock up when you're done. The door closed behind him, leaving Grace alone with the crackling fire and the ghosts of the house. Later that night, the storm eased, but the silence felt heavier. Grace unpacked her small suitcase in the guest room, a few clothes, a Bible, and that same brown envelope she hadn't given him yet. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it. Her thumb traced Clara's handwriting across the front. Finally, she whispered, I'm sorry, Clara, but I can't give it to him. Not yet. She opened the envelope just enough to look inside, a letter and a photograph. She pulled out the photo and froze. It showed Clara, holding a newborn baby, smiling. Grace's breath hitched. Her voice trembled. He doesn't know. He never knew. Tears fell silently down her cheeks. She slipped the photo back into the envelope, sealed it, and hid it under her pillow. Outside, Ethan sat on the porch beneath the dim light. His hat was pulled low, a cigarette between his fingers, one of the few vices he hadn't kicked since Clara's death. He looked toward the guest cabin where a faint light glowed behind the curtain. He muttered to himself, "What are you hiding, Grace?" The wind whispered through the fields, brushing the trees like a voice from another world. The rain had stopped, but the storm hadn't left. It had simply moved inside the walls of Cole Ranch, quiet, unseen, waiting. That night, as lightning faded and the plains fell silent, one thing became clear. The woman sleeping under his roof carried more than a suitcase of memories. She carried a secret that would change everything Ethan thought he knew about his wife and about love itself. And while he didn't know it yet, the storm that began with her arrival was only just beginning. The morning after the storm broke clear and golden, the kind of Texas sunrise that made the world look cleaner than it was. The air was cool, the soil damp, and the sound of cattle lowing carried softly over the hills. Ethan Cole was already awake before the first rooster crowed. He stood on the porch with a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the fog lift off the pastures. The rain had washed the land fresh, but it hadn't done the same for his mind. Sleep hadn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace's face and the letter she claimed Clara had written. He didn't trust her story, not yet. There was something in her eyes last night, a hesitation, a kind of sorrow that wasn't just grief. By the time the sun burned through the fog, Tom Jacobs's pickup rattled up the dirt road. He stepped out, adjusting his hat and squinting toward the porch. "Morning, boss," Tom said, boots crunching the gravel. "You're early," Ethan replied without turning. "Heard the storm knocked down some fences by the south pasture." "We'll get to it after breakfast." Tom nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the window where he caught sight of Grace through the glass, pouring herself a cup of coffee, hair loose around her shoulders. He leaned closer to Ethan. "That her?" "That's her," Ethan said quietly. Tom whistled low. "She looks just like Clara. Gives me goosebumps, seeing her walking around here like that." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't start." Tom held up his hands. "Didn't mean nothing by it. Just feels strange. That's all." "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "Strange is one word for it." Grace stepped out a few minutes later, dressed in a flannel shirt and Clara's old denim jacket. She smiled faintly when she saw Tom. "You must be Tom. Clara used to talk about you." Tom grinned politely. "All good things, I hope." "She said you were the only one Ethan ever listened to." Ethan smirked a little, sipping his coffee. "Don't let him hear that twice." The three of them stood in awkward silence until Grace spoke again. "I can help with the fences," she said. "You don't have to," Ethan replied. "I want to," she insisted. Ethan hesitated, studying her face. Her eyes were calm, but something behind them flickered, a hidden storm. "Fine," he said at last. "But you follow Tom's lead. This ain't city work." Grace smiled softly. "Yes, sir." Tom chuckled. "Well, she's got the sir part right already." The hours that followed felt almost peaceful. Almost. Grace worked quietly, sleeves rolled up, dirt on her hands. She surprised both men with how steady she was with tools. Every now and then, Ethan caught himself watching her from the corner of his eye. The way she tied her hair, the way she squinted against the sun. It was like watching a ghost do chores. At noon, they stopped for lunch under a mesquite tree. Tom passed out sandwiches while Ethan poured water from the jug. "You always this quiet?" Tom asked Grace. She smiled. "I used to talk too much. Life cured me of that." Tom laughed. "Fair enough." Ethan looked at her then, really looked. She was thinner than he remembered, her face lined by sleepless nights. When she caught him staring, she gave a small, tired smile. "Don't worry, Ethan," she said softly. "I'm not here to stir ghosts." "Then stop talking like one," he replied, but his tone had softened. That night, the ranch was quiet except for the hum of crickets. Grace stayed up reading in the living room, the fireplace glowing low. The clock ticked past midnight when she heard a noise, a faint creak near the back door. She looked up sharply. "Ethan?" No answer. She stood, heart pounding, and peeked through the window. The windmill swayed in the dark, but something else caught her eye, a faint light moving across the field. A flashlight. Her pulse quickened. Someone was out there. She stepped back from the window, panic rising. For a moment, she considered waking Ethan, but then stopped. Whoever it was, she knew they weren't here for him. They were here for her. Grace turned off the lamp, stood in the dark, and waited until the light vanished. The next morning, Ethan noticed the look on her face. Pale, tired, haunted. "You sleep at all?" he asked. "Not much," she said. "Storm keeping you up again?" "Something like that." Before Ethan could press further, the house phone rang. He reached for it. "Cole Ranch." "Ethan, it's Sheriff Harlow," said a familiar voice. "We've been getting reports of a vehicle hanging around your property line the past 2 nights. You seen anything?" Ethan frowned. "Not me. Why?" "Probably nothing, but thought I'd check. Tell that ranch hand of yours to keep his eyes open." After the call, Ethan turned toward Grace. "You didn't tell me you were expecting company." She looked startled. "I'm not. Sheriff says there's been someone near the property." "That's not me," she said quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "Didn't say it was. But you sure you didn't bring trouble with you?" Grace's expression hardened. "You think I came here to cause trouble?" "I think you came here with half a story," Ethan said, her eyes filled with tears. "You're wrong." "Then tell me the whole one." Grace hesitated, biting her lip. "Not yet." She turned and walked out before he could stop her. Later that day, Tom came by the barn where Ethan was tightening bolts on the gate. "Heard you two yelling earlier," Tom said casually. "Wasn't yelling," Ethan muttered. "Just talking louder than usual." Tom smirked. "Uh-huh. You ever notice how talking louder usually means someone's hiding something?" "She says Clara left her a letter," Ethan said. "But she won't give it to me." Tom leaned on the gate. "Maybe it's not meant for you." "She said Clara wrote it to me." "Then maybe it's not ready to be read." Ethan gave him a flat look. "That's the kind of nonsense preachers say at funerals." Tom grinned. "Well, sometimes nonsense is the only thing that makes sense." By sundown, the unease in the air grew heavier. Grace didn't come down for supper. Her light stayed on late into the night. Ethan sat by the fireplace, staring at the empty chair across from him, Clara's old seat. For a moment, he thought he saw her there, smiling at him like she used to. He blinked, and she was gone. He stood, rubbing his eyes, then noticed something strange. The back door latch was undone. He walked outside, the cold air biting against his skin. In the dirt near the porch were footprints, smaller than his, leading toward the barn. "Grace!" he called out. No answer. He followed the prints. When he reached the barn, he saw movement inside, a shadow hunched over near the haystack. He lifted his lantern. "Grace!" She flinched, turning quickly. "You scared me!" she gasped. Ethan frowned. "What are you doing out here in the middle of the night?" "I couldn't sleep," she said, voice shaky. "The smell of rain calms me." "You could have stayed inside." "And be alone with my thoughts?" she whispered. "No, thank you." He studied her for a long moment. She looked frightened, not of him, but of something else, something outside the barn walls. "Sheriff said someone's been snooping around," Ethan said quietly. Grace's hands froze mid-motion. "Maybe it's just a drifter," she said, forcing a smile. Ethan didn't answer. "If there's something I need to know, now's the time." "There's not," she said quickly. "I promise." But her voice broke on the last word. 2 days later, Tom found something near the tool shed. A torn piece of blue fabric caught on the fence wire and a half-burned cigarette. He brought them to Ethan. "Whoever was here smokes these," Tom said. "Ain't the kind of brand we carry around here." Ethan turned the cigarette between his fingers. "Foreign?" "Dallas brand," Tom said. "You think that means something?" Ethan's gut twisted. Grace had said she'd come from Dallas. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the kitchen table, the cigarette and fabric in front of him like clues in a riddle he didn't want to solve. The wind outside moaned through the cracks, and every sound made his hand twitch toward the rifle. He told himself he was just being careful. But the truth was, he was scared. Not of whoever was outside, of what Grace might be hiding. Around midnight, Grace's door creaked open upstairs. Barefoot, she walked quietly down the hall, clutching the brown envelope in her hand. Her heart pounded as she stepped outside, the moonlight silvering her face. She crossed the yard, knelt near the old hitching post behind the barn, and began to dig. The soil was soft from the last storm. When she'd made a small hole, she buried the envelope inside and whispered, "Forgive me, Clara. He's not ready." But as she stood, a shadow moved in the distance, tall, silent, watching her. She froze, breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" No answer, just the creak of the windmill turning in the dark. She backed away slowly, ran to the house, and locked every door. At sunrise, Ethan found the disturbed soil behind the barn. He knelt, touching the earth, still soft, freshly turned. Then he saw it, the faint outline of a woman's boot print, Grace's. Tom approached behind him, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "You see something?" "Someone's been digging," Ethan said. "Who?" Ethan looked toward the house. "You already know." Tom frowned. "You gonna ask her?" Ethan stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his hands. "Not yet. She'll tell me when she's ready. Or when she has to." He looked out toward the horizon. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. But the light didn't make him feel better. If anything, it only made the shadows look darker. And in that moment, Ethan Cole knew something for certain. Whatever Grace Miller had buried out here on his land, it wasn't just a secret. It was a piece of the past trying to claw its way back to the surface. For the last 2 days, Ethan had barely spoken to Grace. He'd seen her working, cooking, pretending everything was normal, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted away from his, filled with guilt and something deeper. Sorrow, maybe even fear. Ethan knew she was hiding something, and deep down he already knew it was tied to Clara. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was how much it would change him. That evening, as thunder rolled across the plains, Ethan sat in the barn mending a broken saddle strap. His hands worked out of habit, but his mind was far away. He looked up when he heard footsteps, soft, hesitant. Grace stood at the door, holding a lantern. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan nodded slowly. "I figured we might." She walked closer, the light flickering against her face. "Before I say anything, I need you to understand that Clara loved you, Ethan. She never stopped. "Don't tell me what I already know," he said quietly. "Then let me tell you what you don't." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the brown envelope, the one Ethan had seen her bury. His stomach tightened. "That's what you hid," he said, voice low. Grace nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "It wasn't time yet." She handed it to him. "Now it is." Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was a letter and a faded photograph. He stared at the picture for a long moment. It was Clara, holding a newborn baby, smiling. But beside her, standing with his arm around her shoulder, was Ethan himself. His breath caught. This was taken years ago." Grace nodded. "Before everything went wrong." Ethan turned the photo over. On the back was a date, 2 years before Clara died. He looked up, confused. "Why would she send you this?" Grace's voice trembled. "Because she couldn't face you. She thought you'd hate her." "For what?" he demanded. Grace stepped closer, her voice breaking. "That baby, the one in the picture, she thought wasn't yours." Ethan froze. The world around him seemed to stop. The rain on the barn roof, the distant thunder. Everything went silent. What?" "She thought she'd made a mistake before she married you. But she was wrong, Ethan. The child was yours. She just never got the chance to tell you." Ethan's knees went weak. He leaned against the post, staring down at the photograph. "She lost the baby before she could tell me." Grace nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "And it broke her. Not just the loss, but the guilt. She couldn't live with the thought that you'd hate her for something that wasn't even true." Ethan's chest ached, as if his heart was being ripped apart all over again. "All this time, I thought she died keeping secrets from me." Grace whispered. "She did. But not because she didn't love you. Because she loved you too much." Ethan walked out of the barn into the pouring rain, the letter still in his hand. The sky opened wide, thunder crashing as if the heavens themselves were crying with him. He stared up at the dark sky and shouted, "You should have told me, Clara! You should have trusted me!" His voice echoed across the ranch, swallowed by wind and rain. Grace ran after him, coat soaked, calling out, "Ethan, stop!" But he didn't. He dropped to his knees in the mud, clutching the letter to his chest. "All that time I spent hating myself," he whispered. "All those nights I begged God to tell me why she left me like that, and she was just scared." Grace knelt beside him, crying too. "She wanted you to live again, to forgive her, to forgive yourself." He looked at her, eyes red, voice trembling. "And you came here to make me do that, didn't you?" Grace nodded faintly. "I promised her I would." For a long moment, they said nothing. The rain softened around them, turning from storm to drizzle. Ethan's expression shifted, pain melting slowly into something softer. He looked at Grace, really looked, and saw the same kindness that had lived in Clara's eyes, the same gentle strength. He took a deep breath. "You've carried her pain long enough. You don't owe me any more truth." Grace shook her head. "I owe you peace." She reached into her pocket again and handed him one last folded note. "She wrote this too. Said I should give it to you when the storm finally broke." Ethan unfolded it, his hands shaking. Clara's handwriting filled the page. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then my heart is finally quiet. The baby was ours, my love. I was scared, and I hid behind silence. But please, don't let my ghost be the end of your story. Let someone love you again. Let Grace remind you that you're still alive." By the time he finished reading, his tears mixed with the rain. He looked at Grace and whispered, "She knew, didn't she? She knew you'd come." Grace smiled through her tears. "She said you'd never listen to a preacher, only to someone who loved her as much as you did." Ethan gave a shaky laugh, the first real one in months. "That sounds like her." Days passed. The rain gave way to sunlight, and the ranch began to bloom again, grass greener, air cleaner, and the silence not as heavy anymore. Ethan rebuilt the old fence Clara once painted, while Grace tended to the horses. There was laughter in the air again, soft, cautious, but real. One evening, as the sun set fire across the sky, Ethan stood by the field fence. Grace walked up quietly beside him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You still talk to her?" she asked gently. "Every day," he said with a faint smile. "But now it feels more like she's listening from a better place." Grace nodded. "She'd be proud of you, Ethan." "Maybe," he said softly. "But I think she just wanted me to stop being afraid." Grace looked at him, eyes glimmering in the sunset. "And are you?" Ethan met her gaze. "Not anymore."